Hey there, you're listening to episode 98 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother, Keelan. Today we're talking to Paul Bolte, Executive Vice President of Trustbridge Global. Trustbridge acts as a powerful conduit for money to flow from Christians in countries with high concentrations of wealth to organizations working in other countries around the world. Specifically, Trustbridge connects donor-advised funds in these countries to allow people to make tax-deductible gifts to ministries in other countries, even if they don't have a 501c3 designation. Paul is a lot of fun to talk to, and you don't want to miss this one. Before we get started, I wanted to mention the Finish Line Sprint program. The Sprint program is designed for small groups or individuals to explore what the Bible says about wealth and money, and it provides all the tools to set your own financial finish line. The Sprint Guide is completely free and available on our website at finishlinepledge.com/sprint. Now, let's get to the interview. All right, we have Paul Bolte joining us today. Thank you so much for taking some time to share with us and just tell us a little bit more about your life, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here. Well, you don't have to listen to me for very long to figure out that I'm not from the US. I do live in the US now, but I'm not from here. So if we go back far enough, I started life in Australia. I spent the first 34 years of my life there, and then I moved to New Zealand for 14 years, and I've been in the US now for 12 years. But my journey began in a small town of about 3,000 people in rural Australia, about 6 hours due west of Sydney. So, you know, kangaroos, emus, the whole bit. That's where I grew up. And I grew up on a farm about 35 miles north of the nearest town. Used to catch the school bus every day in for an hour and a half and an hour and a half home every day. Managed to get my homework done on the school bus until just 2 years before I finished, when I actually had to do some work at home. But outside of that, I could do it on the school bus. But I grew up literally, you know, on a farm, learning the work ethic very, very early on. So I was 5 years old and I had my first paying job on the farm, and then it just went on from there. And I always look back at my time where I grew up, and I never, ever regret what I went through. But oh my goodness, I worked hard. And it was just, there were days, I mean, I still have ringing in my ears today from, you know, driving tractors as a kid.
Tell us a little bit about your faith background, Paul. Where did that start to enter into your story, and what has that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go back, I'm a seventh generation Christian. I've actually got a family history book here that takes us all the way back through. My family originally came out from Germany before both wars, settled in Australia, and my grandfather was a Christian, my father was a Christian. And so my journey began the day I was born. I was going to church from the day I was born. Like a lot of kids, you know, I sat and I listened and I learned a lot, but I really didn't take it in, I have to be honest. You know, I had the head knowledge, but not the heart knowledge. And so all the way through school, I could give you all the answers you wanted from the Bible, but really didn't sort of understand what I was doing. I think I made a decision when I was about 9 years old and committed my life to Christ, but again, didn't really understand what I was doing. I think that was a childlike faith rather than an adult faith. So by the time I got to university, I remember I stayed on campus and someone knocked on my door one day, and he was from the university chaplaincy. And I said, oh, yeah, you know, I go to church at home. And well, he was like a dog with a bone after that. He wouldn't let me go. He kept knocking on my door, kept asking me to church. And in the end, I just said, listen, mate, I said, you've just pushed me away. So for 3 years, I didn't go to church at all. And I remember finding this guy years later and telling him the story. He was devastated. But so for 3 years, I didn't do anything stupid, but I just didn't go to church. And in my third year of university, I was, again, still living on campus. I had a nice corner room, you know, as you do, you try to get the best rooms in the dormitories. I had a balcony off the side, and I saw this pretty girl walking past. And she was a part of she lived in the same, we call them a college, which is, I don't know what you call them in the US. What do you call the places that you live? Dormitories?
Dorms. Dormitories, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had a couple of hundred of us living in the same place. And I said to her, where are you going? She said, I'm going to church. And I said, I used to go there. She said, you should come. So I went. And that was it. So I went back to church. There was nothing ever came of that relationship. But I ended up plugging into a Bible study that the church chaplaincy, in fact, that original guy that invited me, he was the guy, he was involved in that. I didn't go to his little Bible study. I went to another guy's. And I remember sitting through, they took me through these 7, what they call the 7 basic Bible studies. And the first one was Romans 5, 8-9, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we've now been justified by his faith, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? Which is great, but it really didn't capture me. It didn't really, I was like, I don't think I want to make a life-changing decision on that one. But the second week was Ephesians 2, 8-9. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith. This is a gift from God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And I remember the guy, he actually pulled out a pen and he said, look, this is how simple it is. He says, it's a gift. And he literally handed me the pen and he said, that's yours now. Now you can do nothing with it. You can put it on a shelf, or you could go and write a award-winning novel with it. You could do all sorts of things with this pen. The gift is yours. You now own it. What you do with it, it's up to you. And I said, are you telling me that this salvation thing is actually a gift and there's nothing I can do to earn it? And he goes, absolutely, that's it. And it was like a penny drop for me. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I said, sign me up. It was literally that quick. And I remember at the time, it was around my birthday in 1984, and there was a crusade coming down from the US. It was a Billy Graham crusade with a guy called Leighton Ford speaking. And it was at our university, and I said, I'm going to go to that, and that'll be the time that, I'll make a decision. And that's exactly what happened. So on the 15th of September, at around about 8 o'clock Sydney time, there was a call that says, okay, who wants to make a decision? Put your hand up. Thankfully, they didn't ask me to come down to the front. I probably wouldn't have done that. And so I raised my hand, and that was the changing point for me. And I've been walking with the Lord ever since. Now, we all know that when you first make a decision to follow Christ, that you have literally just crossed a threshold, but you're really the same person you were yesterday. And I had that experience. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it then became a hunger to start to read my Bible, to start to go to church, to get around people. And my faith grew. And, as the years passed, again, like many Christians, I went through different phases in life. But ultimately, I came to the point of full surrender, where everything I am and everything I have is his. And I used to be concerned that by fully surrendering my entire life to God, that I was going to lose out on something. Because, how could God make it more fun than I could make it? You know what I mean? The reality is that my life has been so much better and so much more rewarding, and I've been blessed beyond comparison after I've actually physically surrendered everything. So I would encourage people, if you've never got to that point where it is a full surrender, everything I have and everything I am is yours, I challenge you to go for it.
Well, Paul, take us through your early career. What did things look like after you graduated from school?
Okay. So when I graduated, I actually graduated with an honours degree in engineering. I moved from Sydney to Perth, which is like moving from New York to Los Angeles. It's that far. And the first 2 years of my career, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had 9 jobs in 2 years, and I just couldn't settle down. And I remember a friend of mine saying to me, hey, Paul, you should get into sales. You could be good at sales. So all these jobs I had were sales jobs, and I hated it. I couldn't, I didn't like calling on people. I didn't like cold calling. It was terrible. And then one day I saw an ad in a paper that was back when they did job ads in the paper, boys, just letting you know. You're obviously younger than I am. Thankfully, this is a podcast. There's no video, so you can't see the color of my hair. And don't ask my age. Okay, it's not allowed. It's okay. You can ask if you need to. And it was for a trainee plant manager at a concrete plant. And I was like, okay, I'll apply for it. So I applied for this job, and I turned up for the first interview. The guy that was interviewing me was the CEO. He was about to retire. I think he was a couple of weeks off retiring. And his last job was to recruit this young trainee plant manager. And there were 3 questions, and the interview went for all of 5 minutes. And so the 3 questions were, well, what do you know about concrete? I said, well, nothing, but I can learn. Okay. How much management experience have you got? I said, well, none, but I know I can do it. Give me a chance. I'll prove to you I can do it. And he goes, have you got a degree? And I said, yes, I do. He says, if you can show me your degree, the job's yours. So I went home, literally drove home, picked up my degree, went back, showed him the degree, and I got the job. And that was really the start of my management career. I was 24 years old, and I ended up serving with about 10 55-year-old, older than I'm not saying whether I'm that old right now. Look, I turned 60 last year, boys. So I've officially hit that age where I'm old. Thought I was have a meltdown, but I didn't. So they'll probably come, 65 or 70 or something further. And so I started to work in this concrete plant, but I had 10, 55-year-old truck drivers working for me. And I said, well, how can I help? Now, I didn't realize that what I was doing was asking the very first question of a concept called servant leadership. And I became a student of leadership. For my entire life, I've become a student of leadership. But they answered me and they said, well, keep our trucks maintain this concrete plant, and go out and sell. And here we are back on the selling thing again. I'm going, I don't like selling. But it turned out there's a concept called relationship selling, which I'd never really tried. And all you do is go out and become friends with people, and they like you, and so they buy from you. And we became the most successful concrete plant in the entire state of Western Australia. The only challenge was I was the only Christian. And so these guys that were running it were all about money and just driving people into the ground. And I was about, how can I help people? How can I make a difference? And so I never got promoted. And so eventually after 4 years, I ended up having to move on. But I went through that role. I then moved into another role. I was the national sales manager in a precast concrete. Then I got involved. I got headhunted actually to go and work for a direct selling company. They were looking for someone ultimately to go to the US, and they needed me to spend a year in Perth, go to New Zealand for a year, and then go to the US. I said, great, I'll do that. I had a friend of mine actually who's a prayer partner of mine. We used to sit and dream about going to the US, what it would be like for us young Australian boys to go to the US and conquer the US. You don't realize how big a dream it is for people outside the US to come here, by the way. Anyway, so I moved to New Zealand and I was like, this is going great. They sent me to the US. I got to travel all over the country to get ready to come here. And then it didn't happen. And I got stuck in New Zealand. I was in New Zealand for 14 years. Now, let me explain the concept here. And if anyone's listening to this from Australia and New Zealand, you'll relate, right? Being sent from Australia to New Zealand is like being sent from the US to Canada. We love our neighbours. We think they're great, but we really don't want to live there. However, I got to tell you that New Zealand was great. I really enjoyed New Zealand. I love the country. I love the culture. And it was really good for me personally. It was almost like being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. I ended up being the CEO of an organisation, 2 organisations, in fact, in New Zealand. And I really enjoyed my time in New Zealand. And then ultimately, the last role I had, I brought that organisation to the US in 2012. I set up a franchise business. I was living in Charleston, South Carolina. I ran that for 6 years. Long story short, the company in Australia went public because it was an Australian company that I bought up. And there was a shareholder revolt. New CEO was put in, and then he sold off all the international markets. I'd spent 6 years putting sweat equity in. I had equity in this deal, and I lost a lot. And so in May of 2018, I found myself on the street. I'm 55 years old, and I've got nothing. And I remember praying, and I said, okay, Lord, everything's yours. I'm yours. I'm probably a bit old to be a pastor, but what have you got? And a friend of mine I'd been in C12. I'm assuming you know what C12 is.
Yeah.
It's a Christian CEO peer accountability group and business owner group. And the chair of my C12 group said to me, hey, Paul, here's a job. You should apply for it. And it was with Trustbridge. Now, I had never heard of a donor advised fund. I'd never heard of the National Christian Foundation. I had no clue about the whole generosity sort of industry. Now, if we go all the way back, I can tell a story of where my generosity journey started, but it was way back when I was a kid. But this transition, I'm sitting there was 4 months. And I basically said, look, I'm going to have to do something. And some of the friends from C12 said, well, why don't you do some consulting? And I said, well, I need to earn an income. How's that going to work? They said, we'll pay you. So we all sat around the table. They figured out what my going rate would be, and they contracted me. I ended up making more money as a contractor over a 4-month period than I did as a CEO. It was unbelievable. God just opened the floodgates. My wife is very security conscious. And so it sort of put that to bed, which was great. And over that 4 months, it allowed me to apply for this role with Trustbridge.
Yeah, so we certainly want to get a lot more into Trustbridge. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background about the organization, how it started, and what kind of the work looks like today.
Sure. The journey of Trustbridge started way back when NCF started. So 40 years ago, NCF started out of the top drawer of Terry Parker's legal office. Fast forward, and you get to a period where you've got two guys, Greg Sperry, who's a gift planning attorney, and David Wells, who was the president of NCF at the time, basically said, look, we've got an issue with getting money out of the US for our clients. We need to solve this. And Greg Sperry's a bit of a whiz, and he said, look, I think I've got a solution for this. And he came up with a structure that would allow people to be able to give to a US 501c3 and for the money to seamlessly be able to leave the US under an equivalency determination. Those who are listening know what that means. Then you can go check it out and look it up. To an organization outside of the US. So they just determined, they did some research and said, where should we set that up? They looked at all of the usual tax locations, but ultimately it was decided that Switzerland would be the place. And it was for a number of reasons. Banking security, political neutrality, just the global reputation of Switzerland. And so Trustbridge itself is actually a Swiss foundation. We also have one in the US. It's called International Generosity Foundation. Not many people know of it. And it's really just the mechanism of being able to get the money out to get it to Switzerland, which is where it then moves to the rest of the world. And so that was in 2016, the entity in Switzerland was formed. Bob Collins, who's the current CEO, was approached. He was at the time was the president of NCF in Tampa Bay. He'd run that for about 16 years. Prior to that, he'd been with Goldman Sachs in London. He was a managing director for Goldman Sachs. Really, really smart guy when it comes to numbers and financial stuff. I mean, I'm pretty good with numbers. I did advanced engineering mathematics, but Bob just makes I sit at his feet when it comes to numbers, I got to tell you. So anyone listening that loves numbers, Bob Collins is amazing. And so they approached Bob, and look, at the time, Bob said, I'm not interested. This is not going to work. And they kept, hounding him, and eventually he said, okay, let me have a look at it. And so Bob got involved and helped set up the Swiss entity. And then I think he started to see the potential of what they were talking about, and about not just getting money out of the US, but getting money out of every country and being able to set up tax efficient organizations in a growing list of countries. And that's really where we've got to today. So Trustbridge is not just helping get money out of the US. We also work with a growing list of countries, and I'll name a few of them just to give you a few. So Canada and the United Kingdom were first out of the gate, then South Africa, then we approached Australia. They were all existing foundations run by Christians. Not all of them were donor advised funds, but most of them were. The one in Australia was not a donor advised fund. It was running projects, but it had the structures and everything it needed to be able to do that. And we talked to them about, opening up to be a donor advised fund. And they said, great, let's do that. And so that was the first countries that really got involved. And then after that, we've actually had to proactively go out and approach and be the catalyst really to help start Christian-run donor advised funds in a growing list of countries. So the countries that have since opened up is Germany, Switzerland itself. So there's a foundation in Switzerland, Romania, Puerto Rico. We've got one in the Philippines. We've got one in New Zealand now. We're working on, the ones that we're currently working on in Asia is Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Korea, and Taiwan. Japan, I guess, as well, but we haven't sort of gone as far as Japan as we'd love to. Europe, basically anything in Europe that's what we'll call a net sending country would be a target for us right now. We're currently in discussions with the Netherlands. Quite excited about that one. We'd love to open in France. We'd love to open in Italy. Basically any country that has tax benefits for giving in their country would be an ideal solution for us to go in and actually help. Now, it doesn't mean to say we won't go into countries if they don't have a tax benefit. South Africa does not have that, but we have a partner in South Africa. South Africa is also what we'll call a net receiving country, not a net sending country. And eventually we'll open up all the net receiving countries as well. But for now, our focus is on the net sending countries. Just to give you some background on some numbers, the first year we did about $4 million in cross-border granting. And to date, we've granted out, if I use US dollars to make it easier for people to understand, because not everyone understands Swiss francs, and that's our main currency that we work with. We've granted out about $350 million US dollars to 94 different countries, over 4,000 grants since 2017.
Wow, that's quite some work being done. So you talked about getting money out of the U.S. or out of other countries. And just so I make sure that I am understanding that process right, what the scenario where Trustbridge is most helpful then is for somebody in the U.S. or another country in a similar situation who wants to make a tax-deductible donation to a ministry that's not based in the U.S.? Is that basically the situation?
Correct. Not based in their country. So if you're living in the US, it's giving to a charity directly
Right.
that's not got a US 501c3.
Right.
What people don't realize is that, and look, don't get me wrong with this, but let me just clarify. If you set up a 501c3, there's a cost to set that up. There's a cost to maintain it and the cost to keep it compliant. And so somewhere those costs have got to be covered. Now, if we could send the money directly to the charity on the ground doing the work in that other country, we could save a lot of those costs. And so what we do is we can offer charities in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, the benefits of not having to set up their own 501c3. We act as that entity for them. We take in the money, we issue the tax receipt, the money lands in a fund in their entity's name, it sits with us in Switzerland, and they can then draw it down to their bank account as they need. Now, most charities will draw it all down as soon as it comes in, and that's fine. However, there are some countries that have currencies that are not that strong. And they will hold it in a stronger currency, like US dollars, sitting with Trustbridge, and they will draw down what they need at any given time per month, and we'll just send them an amount each month rather than sending all that they've covered. Like, I'll give you a classic example. We've got a group in Lebanon that has a significant amount of money with us. I won't give you the numbers, but they don't pull it all down. They draw down what they need, 40 or 50 grand a month, and out it goes. And then they turn it to cash and go use it.
Paul, I'm curious, how do you handle the movement of money across different currencies? I've experienced this personally. My wife has family that lives outside of the US, and at times they've sent money for wedding, birthday, whatever it is, and there's a pretty steep cost to doing that. Or if you're at the airport and you're trying to exchange money, it always seems unnecessarily expensive to me.
It's horrendous.
Imagine if you're transferring 350 million, you've worked out some kind of efficiency there.
We have. And look, the folks that do it at the airport, we'll call that retail foreign exchange. If you go to a bank and try and get it done, I'm going to argue that's probably still retail. It's a little better than it is at the airport. In fact, let's just say the airport's sort of excessive retail and the banks are retail. We do work with a number of banks. We have one specific bank that we work with that does all of our foreign exchange. We do significant amounts of foreign exchange conversions on a monthly basis. And because of the volume that we do, we're able to get very good foreign exchange rates. So the way that we say to a charity, let's say they've collected money in US dollars and it needs to go to Brazil in Brazilian real, as an example. We would say to the charity, look, let's say we're sending them 50,000 US dollars. Go get a quote from your bank and tell us how many real you'll get, and we'll give you a quote and tell you how many real you'll get, and then use the best deal. Now, 9 times out of 10, we can actually do a better deal than the local banks can do because of the wholesale buying power that we've got of being able to do so much in foreign exchange. Now, that's one way that we do it. The other way that we do it is because we've got money coming in and out of many of these countries. Let's just take the United Kingdom, for an example. A donor in the United Kingdom gives into a fund with our network member in the United Kingdom, and that's Stewardship UK. Wonderful organisation. They've been around since 1906, so they're way older than everyone else. They haven't been a donor advised fund since 1906, but they have been around since then. So let's say someone in the UK wants to send 50 grand to the US, and someone in the US wants to send 50 grand to the UK. Does it make sense to convert the USD into pounds and then send the cash through a bank and then turn around and turn the pounds into dollars and bring it all the way back again? It doesn't. So what we do is we say, look, we've already got 50 grand sitting in the US. We've already got 50K pounds sitting in the UK. Let's just send it back out again and send the dollars back out into the US. And now we're able to do that, and we do a calculation ourselves. We use the wholesale rate of the day, and we have a very small margin on it. And that can be around 1% or even less, depending on the strength of the currency. The stronger currencies, the better the deal. The weaker the currency, the harder it is to get under 1%. But that's still way better than you're going to get at the airport. Now, don't ask me how we track all of that. If you really want to go detailed, oh my goodness, we've had to build our own software to track this. Because there was no donor advised fund software that was global, that could do multi-currency. It didn't exist. And so we built the whole thing ourselves.
I just got to pause for a second because it's so encouraging to me to hear all of the layers of detail that go on in all these transactions. This is all just trying to encourage generosity, getting to the feet on the ground. And that is what I love about how God works, that he has Christians planted in strategic positions all over the world in all different areas of society and technology and business. And it's like the most incredible, I wouldn't say underground, although in many places it is underground, but the most incredible network of people moving towards the same destination is, the church. And just hearing how much Trustbridge has worked to try to facilitate money getting to ministries and stuff like that. And, we hear this in terms of church planting networks and all of the ways that they, try to overcome these complex things, and Bible translation, all these different ways that God is working. So anyway, it's just cool and gets me excited when I hear about the way that God uses Christians and people with just amazing minds and the way that he's designed them. So you got into this a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit more. How do you guys figure out where to go next? And you talked a little bit about ascending and receiving destinations. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like, and, over the next couple of years, how you would know where to next target.
Sure. And look, sometimes it is opportunistic. If there is a market that we hear of that's happening, and let's just use New Zealand as an example. I was in Australia. I was meeting with the foundation in Melbourne. His name's Trust Foundation. And they said, hey, we've heard of this guy, Rob, in New Zealand that's looking at starting a donor advised fund. And he's a Christian. I said, seriously, introduce me. And so we got connected. Now, would New Zealand have been next on our priority list? Maybe not. But I got hold of Rob and I said, hey, we should talk. We got to talk. We then met personally. And then it went from there. And eventually they have now become a member of the Trustbridge network. So when you hear us talk about network members, they are foundations in a country that has signed an agreement with us that they're going to abide by some code of ethics and codes of practice on how we're actually going to do this. Because you sort of highlighted a little bit before, but what you don't realize is the level of compliance that we go through to give the comfort to the donor that when we send money to a charity in India, that we've already checked out that they're real. We've done a legal due diligence on them to ensure that we can actually send money to them. And so some of the countries that we're talking to are opportunistic. Currently, we're talking with Singapore. There was a foundation starting in Singapore. So anytime we hear that there's a new foundation starting, we're going to talk to them. And so if anyone's listening to this and they know in a country somewhere where there's a foundation that is either starting or is up and running or someone's thinking about it, please call me and let me know about it. But there are other countries where we've said, no, we want to proactively go after this. And let's just take Switzerland as an example. Even though we had our own foundation in Switzerland, we knew that we needed a foundation in Switzerland to look after the local Swiss donors. Just like NCF looks after the folks in the US, Trustbridge can't do all of that. We want to focus on the cross-border stuff and have someone else that's a specialist focus on what's going on in Switzerland. And so it took, a number of years, but progressively we got to meet more and more people in Switzerland. We shared the vision, and that's really what we do. We just continually network and we meet with people in countries. We share the vision of what we're doing until someone captures it and go, man, that's a great idea. I want to run with that. I was recently in Malaysia and Indonesia. And the reason I was there is that because people had captured the vision for this on our previous visits. And we're now actually forming groups of people to come together to actually be that sort of core group that starts a foundation. And so there is a whole journey that we take people through on going from, hey, we're just hearing about this concept. We've never heard of a donor advised fund. Another example, Dominican Republic. Daryl Heald goes into the Dominican Republic, does a journey of generosity, meets some high net worth families and talks about Trustbridge. And one of the guys says, this is fantastic. I want to do this. And Daryl says, you need to meet this guy. So I met him on Zoom and I said, hey, I need to come and visit. So I went and visited and we ate so much good food. I got to tell you, in the Dominican Republic, it was amazing. I would go there any day. But now there is a core group of people coming together and they're actually putting together a legal entity right now to actually create a foundation in that country. So it's a long-winded way of saying We'll deal with opportunities as they come up. We might not have gone to the Dominican Republic, but they have come to us, so we're going to say yes. But the proactive ones that we're chasing is the net sending countries. So that's going to be Western Europe and wealthy Asia. And that's where our current focus is. So for the next probably 3 to 5 years, that's where our focus will be. If someone comes to us and says, hey, we want to start in a net receiving country, and they've already started the foundation, then, hey, we'll probably work with them. But we're probably not going to put the effort in to go in there and be a catalyst to try and start something like we would in a net sending country in this short period. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to mobilize all the resources that are in the hands of Christians. I'm sure you guys have seen all the research. There is a truckload of money. I'm told it's in the trillions of dollars in the hands of Christians, and it's sitting there. Bob Collins loves to share the story. It's like a mountain of money, and it's frozen. And our job is to help build an organization and a network that will help melt that mountain of money and get it flowing. If you spend enough time with David Wills, he'll share the story of how he had the vision of the starting of NCF with these oil wells pumping oil out of the ground all over the United States, and that then became the network structure of what is NCF. He had a similar vision a number of years later, which were oil wells all around the world, pumping oil out and then moving oil all around the world. And that's now become Trustbridge, where we're actually helping bring the resources out of the ground in Germany right now and allowing that to move into Africa, to move into Latin America, to move into Asia, where it's needed.
Well, as you are describing this vision, it's really exciting because there's a number of themes that have come up as we've done dozens and dozens of interviews over the last few years. And there's the collaboration of these networks, like Keelan was talking about earlier. There's a focus on mobilizing businesses and more intentionally structuring generosity in a way to get the gospel all over the world. And that takes resources, that takes people. And Trustbridge is creating a huge efficiency in the movement of money, which then fuels this type of work. And that's really exciting. And I want to hear from you a little bit more about, as you travel around the world and you get to see generosity expressed in different cultures and different contexts, what do you see is constant throughout, and how do you see it expressed differently in different cultures?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the fact that we've got a common thread of our faith flows through everyone. We all have a base platform to work from of how are we actually taught from the Bible around generosity. How has Christ actually taught us to be generous people? Now, culturally, some cultures are more generous than others. Some of them struggle with that message more than others do. But what we find is, and look, we're not really the tip of the spear when it comes to the actual transforming of people's minds. It's each of these members in the network that are out there and actually running their own donor advised funds in the country that are then working alongside organizations like Generosity Path, similar to Generous Giving here in the United States, running journeys of generosity and actually transforming people's minds around the biblical message of generosity. So unlike most people, they hear about generosity from their pastor in church, and it normally means, hey, give here. But here in a journey of generosity, there is no cost for people, there's no ask, and they get to actually unpack what it means to actually be generous with their resources, with their time, with their financial capital. And how do they do that? I had the pleasure of sitting in multiple journeys of generosity recently, one in Singapore, one in Indonesia, and one in Malaysia. And I've got to tell you that every single person, by the time we finished, had all come to that same point, but they weren't there at the very beginning. And so I think that culturally we are all very different, but we all have this one core value of our faith and really what we're called to do. We are called as part of our faith to be generous with everything that we have. Everything. Not just our money, but our time and everything. And I'm seeing that become like a flame getting fanned across the world as more and more countries start to grab the passion for generosity. It's exciting to watch it happen. I have to say, I shared this recently with someone. I think I put a message up on LinkedIn or something, and I shared our impact report for 2023 for Trustbridge. And my comment was, I get to work here because I get to watch all of this happen. And it's just such a blessing to be part of this and see it happen. Like your podcast is called The Finish Line, right? This for me is my final season of my career. Right? I made a conscious decision to pull out of the corporate world, to come into the nonprofit world and to give it everything I've got in the last season of my life and actually make a difference for the kingdom. I couldn't do it as a pastor. My brother did that. My mother has done that as a lay preacher. But he's called me into business and around the financial resources. I've been around it my entire career. But everything I have learned along the way, even to the point of understanding the moving all these digital credits and all this sort of stuff, I'd already done that in the corporate world. And so to bring it into the nonprofit world, God had already prepared all of that. So I just feel incredibly grateful to be doing what I'm doing and to get to meet the people I get to meet and to be able to share the story of what we do. And I appreciate you guys giving us the chance to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a question about something we were talking about a little bit earlier. I think Cody mentioned it. Obviously, in the U.S., there's huge tax advantages to giving. And you mentioned that in at least a number of other countries, there are some kind of structure for that as well. I actually have no context for what that looks like internationally, but I'd love to hear how common is tax-advantaged giving internationally around the world, and what does that look like in different cultures compared to the U.S., which we're more used to?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I would need to be an international tax attorney to be able to give you a really good answer. So, inverted commas, everything I'm about to say is Paul talking, not an attorney. There are many countries that do offer tax benefits for giving. It's very different in many countries. Some of them have limits. Some of them allow you to give a portion of profits. Some a very small portion of revenues. Some will allow for tax deductibility for social needs, but not for faith-based needs. So it's very interesting on how some of these different countries work. How can I put this nicely? Generosity is driven a lot in the US by tax because of the way the tax system is structured. I think it's not as much like that around the rest of the world. There are many countries that don't have any tax benefits at all, and yet they're still generous and they still give. And they don't look for the tax benefit. Now, they do want to have the security of knowing that where they're giving, the money's actually being put to work. They want to see impact for their dollars. I think everyone is interested in that. We don't try and do that ourselves. We legally vet. We do not qualitatively vet our charities. That's the job of the donor, or they can find someone else that can do that for them. We are so busy doing what we're doing, just getting the dollars from the donor to the charity, keeping it compliant, moving it fast, and getting it there safely and efficiently, and at a low cost, by the way. If anyone's ever done any research on moving money around the world, our cost for our charities to move money is 1%. And the nearest above us is at 5%, and then it goes on up from that. So we have deliberately come into the marketplace to say, look, we believe that there is a lot of money in the hands of Christians. We want to make it easy for them to move. We want to make it cost effective for them to move. And we want to take the hassle out of it so that you don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. I can't tell you how many churches in the United States send money to missionaries overseas and don't do it compliant. Like, I shake my head one day, they're going to have a visit from the IRS, and it's like, oh dear, didn't realize about that.
Well, Paul, as you lower the barriers to money moving across borders and supporting work all over the world, you make that easier to do. How have you seen that start to open up opportunities that maybe weren't there before Trustbridge provided this channel? Oh,
it's huge, huge. Look, we get stories, and I got to say, getting stories from charities is not easy, but we do get them, of people telling us, if it wasn't for you, we couldn't do what we do. We weren't able to get the money out of the US. We weren't able to get money out of the UK. People wanted to give, but they wanted a tax benefit. And you guys have been able to solve that for us. And, you don't realize the difference that $5,000 makes, $10,000 makes to a small charity in Kenya. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Oftentimes we look at the money here in the US flowing, and it's in the millions of dollars. It doesn't need to be $1 million overseas. Here's the key, right? When you send money directly to a charity overseas, the bang for your buck is significantly higher because of just the leverage that you're getting. You can get so much more for your dollar in a country that can make it go further, because they do. It's cheaper and they can get to more people. And look, I hate to bring it down to, a return on investment, But I would challenge anyone that is giving that if you want to get the best return on your investment, then you can do that by giving directly to charities overseas.
And along a similar vein to that, do you have stories of how you have seen this? I'm sure you do. How you have seen this better interconnect Christians across different cultures. We are seeing that in many spheres of work, especially in the Great Commission, in reaching those that have not heard the gospel, in Bible translation, in a lot of that movement. Huge interconnectedness now between different cultures and different countries. Have you been able to witness a lot of that as Trustbridge has come in and connected literally different pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only have we seen it, but we've been proactively trying to encourage it. So we collaborate with not just these foundations that we're working to set up with and helping them to connect with each other so that we've got cultures connecting with cultures. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how we're doing that at an event in June. But we're also connecting with other parts of the generosity movement. So, we work very closely with Generosity Path, who is a global version of generous giving. We work closely with Global Trust Partners and Generous Church. And these are guys that are a part of the same ecosystem, but we've all got different roles to play. And we love all of them. We support them. We pray for them. Our goal eventually is to support them all financially because we're the financial engine. And, we've actually got a revenue stream. And as our growth gets bigger and bigger, eventually we'll be earning more than we're actually costing. And we're going to put that back into the generosity movement to actually help grow it. But we do bring people together from different cultures. In 2022, we ran an event called Excursion in Switzerland. We invited families from all over the world to come together and experience meeting each other from different cultures, experiencing Switzerland and what it might mean to actually house some of your assets in Switzerland, which is a secure place because there's many countries that are struggling. I won't talk about some of the countries, but you can think about some of the Asian countries that have been through difficult challenges recently because of overlords that are looking to get money out of their countries into different countries. And so we invited them, they came, and we're running the event again this year in June in Switzerland. Now, it may be too late by the time you hear this podcast, but hey, if you're interested and you want to come, please check it out. Go onto the Trustbridge website, look for a word called excursion. It's actually spelt with a K though. It's the German spelling of it. But it was just tremendous to see people coming together from the Czech Republic, from Germany, from Austria, from the Netherlands, and then from the US and Australia and South Africa and Singapore. And we're all together. And it was just like one of my best friends, and we got ourselves into trouble in Zurich riding e-scooters around the street, is from Singapore. And another good friend is from Germany. And we got ourselves into trouble because there were the three of us were extroverts and we were doing all sorts of dumb stuff that we shouldn't have been doing. But we had a great time. So just like you say in the Bible translation, we're coming together around generosity to work with the people in the generosity space to help and support each other. And if you go actually onto our website and you look at our core values, one of our core values is find a way to say yes. We're actually looking for ways to say yes to work with people. And we strategically have actually proactively started to collaborate with each of these partners to find ways that we can help them, support them, and help the greater generosity movement.
I'm thinking, you said that your generosity story started pretty early on in your life. I want to hear more about that. And then also, now you're seated in a position to clear the way for generosity to flow more freely through other people. And then in the future, to be able to actually contribute to work that is fueling more generosity as well. Can you just share a little bit more about how that all began in your life?
Sure. We'll go back to sitting in church at the earliest days that I can remember as a kid, and the plate used to pass by. It's like you used to sit in the wooden pews and the wooden plates would pass by. We didn't even have the bags. And you could hear coins dropping in it. My parents would give me a coin. I don't know how much it was, 20 cents to start with, and we would drop the coins in. And my father was always a bit of a funny guy, and he would give me lifesavers and said, look, not only put the coin in, but put a lifesaver in, because don't forget there's some guy at the back that's got to count that, and he can eat the lifesaver. And so I would do that. And he taught me all sorts of tricks. He says, if you tap the bottom of the plate, you can make the noise. It sounds like something's going in. I'm sure everybody's tried that trick. But I think the earliest recollection for me is that I really saw my parents live this out. They were tithing from before I was born. And I saw them, they went through sort of budgeting cycles where they would literally put money aside and say, that's for the church. It would go into an envelope, and then they would take it to church and they would put it into the plate. And I distinctly remember one of the most influential moments of generosity for me in my childhood. I was probably in my teens. I'd grown up on this farm. It was actually quite a unique farm. We actually had a natural lake that sometimes would flood if it rained too much and would cover a lot of our property. 5/6 of our property would go under water. It was a 4,500 acre property, and we would lose, over 3,000 acres of it underwater. And so we would have to sell all our sheep and live off, a lot less than we had. And I remember this one year we had a crop planted in this lake bed. It was due to be harvested. It was valued at 60,000 Australian dollars once it was harvested, which was like a big chunk of our revenue for the year. And it started to rain, and it rained and rained and rained, and it flooded. And next thing you know, the heads of this crop are just sticking out of the water, and there's all these ducks swimming along, just eating the heads of the grains of this. It was a barley crop. And it was just breaking my father's heart. He actually approached the local government and said, look, we've always let people come onto our property to shoot ducks during a duck season. And I'm sorry if people are listening and they're not into shooting. It was back in my childhood. But I'm sure there are people on here that do actually shoot ducks, and that's okay. So we would always let people onto our property, and we never ever charged. People would come visit, they would bring us gifts, and we used to love it as kids. The guy that would be working for Coca-Cola would turn up with a whole bunch of cans of Coca-Cola. We'd love that. But he got this special license and put the word out through the connections that we had that there was a special season happening and that they should come for this particular weekend. Now, we had never charged before, but we decided that we would charge this time $20 a head. We invited the local service club from our little town to come out and collect the money. So people came and they collected the money, and 3,000 people turned up. Now, you do your numbers well. 3,000 times 20 is $60,000. That's the exact same amount of that crop. God had actually replaced the value of that crop with what we needed. But my parents turned around and said, we're going to give half of it to that service club for coming out and working. It wasn't even a Christian organisation, but they gave it to that service club and said, you go and do something good in the local town and make a difference. I think I might have got a decent steak out of it, but it really hit me that we didn't get a lot of steak, by the way, when I was a kid. I think we grew up on sausages and mashed potato. But it was a really good example for me to watch. And so when I finally made my personal decision to follow Christ, it was an easy decision for me when I heard my very first message on tithing to go, boom, I'm there. And that started when I was straight out of university, and it's never stopped. And it's, if ever I see opportunities to do more, or I have the opportunity to do more, I'll do that. But generosity to me is not just about money. It's also about time. And I often use my time to help others where I can, as well as my financial resources. So, you asked the question about where do I see this going, in the role that I've got right now. I think I mentioned my age earlier on in the call, so we won't mention it again. But somewhere in the next 10 years, I'll probably get put out to pasture. And I see that one of my roles over the next 10 years is to pass this on to the next generation, is to actually find people that can be passionate like we have been. And it's not just me personally, it's everyone that works at Trustbridge. I've talked about Bob Collins, but I haven't talked about his wife, Tricia. They were the ones that actually started it. Tricia runs the operations. She's the VP of Philanthropy and Giver Services. The two of them are the ones that really founded Trustbridge. They ran it themselves. They carried their own costs. And talk about generous. Oh my goodness. They did this without actually taking any salary out of it. But eventually that actually had to start happening. But all of us eventually are going to have to hand over to the next generation. And so that's something that's on our mind. And we don't want to see that Trustbridge stops when we stop. We want to see it to go on. We set ourselves a goal to have $1 billion granted by 2030. We're at 350 million, so we see it quite feasible. In fact, I think it's going to happen before 2030 the way we're going. I'm just watching the start of 2024. It's just come out of the gate. It's unbelievable. We've had the single biggest quarter we've ever had in the start of this year. And it just amazes me. If you've ever run a business and you keep thinking to yourself, I want my business to grow. I want to see sales go up and that sort of stuff. When you're actually working in a kingdom business and you know that God is behind what you're doing and you watch it grow and you give all glory to Him, it is such a joy to watch this whole thing happen. It's like I just almost sit on the sidelines and go God, look at this. This is awesome. But, there is a human side of me that gets excited as well. I apologize for that, but it's exciting to watch it happen and be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we have gotten a side seat of just seeing that over and over and over through all the different stories we've been able to hear on this podcast. And this is exactly what we're talking about. And I think it has given us a real appreciation for just how big God is working right now. And I think specifically this next 10 or 20 years are going to be some of the most incredible, decade or two that we've seen in the last 1,000 years or so. There's just so much momentum happening right now, and you guys are right in the middle of all of it, which is just awesome. Before we finish up today, I do want to leave some time for our manager's minute. So we like to end every episode with just a practical action our listeners can take to step into their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. So, Paul, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
I do. And this one's a little different. And I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And that is not just to take your financial resources, but to take your time. I talked about it earlier. And I'm going to share a personal example of what I've actually done in my own church. And that is to actually take the gifts and skills I've got, whatever you've got, I've got the ability to be able to do handiwork. And so I've offered to actually help, people in need, single women. We've got a woman in our church that had cancer in her leg, had an amputation, went through a marriage breakup, living in a house that's 180 years old. It has no insulation in it. And so I put together a team of people. We went into that house. We went under that house. You know what it's like under a 180-year-old house. It's not pleasant. But we put underfloor insulation in that, and then we blew insulation into the walls, and we provided all of the resources to do that. And it was just such a blessing to be able to help that woman. And then last year at Thanksgiving, she invited us to come for a Thanksgiving turkey. And my wife and I went, and we sat. She had an open fire going, and the place was warm. And I said, "How good is this?" I said, "It's actually warm in here." And so my encouragement to anyone is that whatever gifts or skills that God has given you, take them and use them to serve others. Add your financial resources by all means to serve others in doing that. And you'll actually be blessed more than you can imagine.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of support behind that, where we really incorporate all of ourselves, both our financial side as well as all the skills and time that God gives us. Then there is a synergy there that is really hard to replicate. Where can people learn more about Trustbridge? If somebody is listening to this and they want to know more or figure out how to connect to you guys, where can they find you?
Pretty easy to find us. You can go to Trustbridge Global, it's all one word, .com, and find us on the website. You can click on there to contact us, and eventually that'll get to me. So feel free to check us out. We're also on LinkedIn. You can just search for the word Trustbridge on LinkedIn. You can connect with us there. We'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to help you. So if you're listening to this podcast and you've got needs of international granting, we'd love to help you. If you're in a country and you love this concept of being involved in the generosity space and you want to get involved in starting something, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Paul. This has been a lot of fun. It's so cool to hear all the behind the scenes of what God is doing all throughout the world. And it sounds like he is up to some incredible stuff. So thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 98. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A Financial Finish Line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1. Define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2. As God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3. After 90 days, explore the million ways you can use that margin you set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.